Greetings, baseball fans, and welcome into another edition of the British Baseball Podcast. I'm your host, Matthew, and on today's show, I'm delighted to be joined by former umpire Bernard BJ DeLorenzo as he takes on a voyage of stories from his early playing days up until his involvement as a coach and eventually umpire. Just before we get into today's episode, just like to break a little bit of news as Team GB player Richard Berriton is heading over to Duke University to finish off his baseball career as a Blue Devil. Congratulations, Richard. All the best of luck. I know the British baseball community has sent you a lot of support on Twitter, and we'd like to send our best too. So when you're finished with the show, why not subscribe, review if you can, and follow the podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Brit Baseball Pod. Then head over to the new British Baseball Podcast YouTube channel and subscribe there too. Currently working on some stuff for a documentary, and I'd be really happy to share those videos with you as and when they are produced. But now, without further delay, let's get on to this conversation with BJ. My guest today is former British baseball umpire Bernard DeLorenzo, who's better known in the world of British baseball as BJ or Del if you're in Liverpool. He's been reaching out to me over the last couple of weeks with chapters from his new book that he's writing. The first one was read out on the podcast. So we decided instead of reading each chapter in my dull Salford tones, I'd like to invite Bernard as a guest.
Hey, Matt, thanks a lot for inviting me.
No problem. It's a pleasure to have you on. The chapters that you sent over have been an absolute joy to read, especially as I'm trying to learn more about baseball and British baseball in its history. Can you tell us about how you came to these shores and your first involvement in British baseball?
Yeah, I met my wife in Germany when I was stationed there. She worked for the U.S. Army, and so we got married there and moved back I got posted back to the States. And after I finished my tour in the Army, we moved back to Liverpool because she got a bit homesick. And one day she come home with a baseball program, and it was sponsored by a company called Madison Meats. And it had all the different local teams listed in the contacts. Well, I tried to call the first contact, which was the Liverpool Trojans. And Norman Wells Lyon was continually engaged. So I said, well, I'll go to the next one. And the next one was the Aintree Indians. And it was managed by a guy named Stan Williams. And he said, well, luckily he called because we're having training that night. So I went along to Long Lane at the Geoffrey Humble Sports Ground. And trained with the guys. And at that time, that's where I met my longtime pal, Chris G., Robbie Hodge, and Mike G. And they were sort of with me for the whole time of my baseball career. And that's how I got involved with baseball in the UK.
And what year was it when you started?
Oh, it was 1977, I think it was, yeah.
So in the late 70s, you said that you played a lot of games in your book. You said you played a lot of games under John Bennett as the bootleggers. Was winning that important at the time, or is it more about enjoying baseball with new friends, or what sort of characters did you have in the team?
Well, with the Southport bootleggers, like I said, when the Aintree Indians folded, basically, next team that we could go to was in Southport. So we went down and met this guy named John Bennett, who, if you got a first glimpse, he was Colonel Sanders from Kentucky Fried Chicken. He's spitting image of him. Anyhow, he had a team made up of all Brits. And me and Chris and Mike, we went down and we played for him. It more or less was like helping out, teaching the kids how to play ball. Winning wasn't that important. It was getting the game over to the rest of the Brit players. And, like I said, we lost every game we played, but we played. And we never forfeited any games because of players. We always had team players there.
You mentioned off air before that there's a lot of teams within the region at that time. Who was like your greatest rival when you started out?
Oh, it had to be the Liverpool Trojans, because they actually had two teams running at the time. I think it was the Trojan Red Sox at one time, but the Trojans were the big team. You had to beat them. I think Skem Tigers were the second best team. And then, any other team fell underneath them. We had the Otis Elevators had a team, the Royals. And you had, oh, God, so many teams there, I can't even think of them now. But like I said, at the end of the day, the Bootleggers were at the bottom of the pile.
So where did you go after the Bootleggers?
We had a gentleman from the base at Warrington, Ozzy Hall. He came down and played with the Bootleggers a few games. I don't know how we got in contact with him, but he come down, and it was about 2 seasons after that. He said they're going to start a baseball team at Burtonwood. Would you guys consider coming up? Well, we said, yeah, because, playing on an Army base, they got a proper baseball diamond. And we went up and we tried out for the team, which was basically mostly made up of American soldiers. And that's where we met Bobby Orm. And so we started playing for them. I think that was, might have been in the late 79. Didn't play with him very long before I went back to the States. But again,
you described it as
yeah.
Sorry.
It was going from a poor team to a rich team. They had top line uniforms. You had white baseballs to practice with. You know what I mean? It was that type of transition.
Were there any other differences between the two teams? Was it, like you said before, you were on an Army base and it was just playing with what you had?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's a proper baseball diamond, all cutouts. It was like playing back in America, basically.
Was this the same season that you ended up playing at the Oval?
Yeah. We went down to play Cobham Yankees. They were the Southern winners, and we were the Northern winners. We went down to play in the final down at the Oval, and that's where.
What was it like playing at one of the most famous cricket grounds in the country?
Now, don't forget, you got to imagine our local games. If we had 10, 15 spectators, that was a crowd. So when we went to the Oval playing, there were like 500, 600. That was like 10,000 to us. So it was an experience that I will never forget.
Were there any other season highlights that you had around that time?
No, that was it. I just did. And you had Ernie Banks, the great Ernie Banks, and Gary Gooch having a home run contest so you could hit the ball the furthest. And that itself was a good laugh. And Mr. Banks stuck his head in the dressing room afterwards and said, "Too bad you guys lost the game, but hey, there's plenty more to come." And that's all he said when he left.
I did a bit of reading up beforehand about Mr. Banks, and he was famous Chicago Cubs player. It was named Mr. Cubs, wasn't he? He was inducted in the Hall of Fame in 1977. He was the first African American player for the Chicago Cubs, and you met quite a brilliant individual there.
Yes, like I said, I never got to meet him personally because I was in the outfield, chasing home run balls over the fence.
Have you crossed paths with any other famous players?
It depends on what you mean by famous. I mean, all the players that I've ever played with in England, to me, they were famous. They were good players. They loved baseball, and they'd seen which way baseball was heading and wanted to help out. So to me, that is being famous.
Who are some of the best players then that you've seen within British baseball? You don't really have to be British. Any sort of notable names? Anyone you want to give a mention to?
The best one that in my books was a pitcher for the Burtonwood Braves called Rick Parker. This guy, if someone threw in the normal league threw a curveball, that was unusual. Rick Parker threw a knuckle curveball, and his fastball was about 87 miles an hour. So this guy had it all. And I'll tell you what, he could hit, he could run. He was in the Army, but I could see him being the AAA ball. He was that good. And other than that, like I said, I played with a lot of good people that were good ball players. And, they loved the game and wanted to promote it. But Chris G and Robbie Alger and Robbie Orm, all these guys, they win baseball right to the end. Even when they retired, they come down to help out, which I think is really good for baseball.
Yeah, yeah. Seeing a lot of teams like not sort of a call to arms, but putting it out there that even if you think you may be too old to play, there's always a role that you can do at the club, either scoreboards or helping out with brews and drinks and stuff. There seems to be always something for somebody to do down at a ballpark.
Oh yeah, yeah. And like I said, that's what upsets me a bit because I've known a lot of players that they give up the game for whatever reason, work commitments or whatever, and they still had Sundays free, but they wouldn't give anything back to you. They wouldn't come down and cheer the team on or give the young guys a bit of encouragement. And that's, to me, I think that's wrong.
Mm. A little bit of knowledge could have gone a long way, I suppose.
Yeah. But even when I stopped and started umpiring, I'd go down and watch the practices. And if I could help out in any way and give instruction to players, I would, which I think, all the ex-players should be doing that.
So you had a bit of a brief spell back in Los Angeles in 1981, then you moved back to Liverpool a few years later. What did you do when you got back?
Actually, the first thing I done was call my mate Chris G, and I said, "You still playing ball?" He said, "Oh yeah, still at Burtonwood." I said, "Oh, is there any chance to get back in the team?" He said, "Well," he said, "the sergeant major's running it now, and it's really a tight knit team." So I said, "Well, I'll come up anyhow." So I went up and watched the game, and got introduced to the sergeant major, and he said, "You're fine to join the team, but I don't know if I can fit you in anywhere." So I sort of, at that time, thought about, well, I better look for something else to do in the summer. But luckily enough, one of the players got injured, so he said, "You don't have to take their position," which I did. And I was back in the team then. I stayed with Burtonwood until, I forget what year it was, but the base actually closed, so they, defrocked the team. That's when I went to the Liverpool Trojans.
So we're talking a bit before about natural progression of a baseball player. So you've been a player. How did you sort of end up going from player into management?
Well, at that time, when the base closed down, me and Chris, we moved off to the Trojans, and we had an American running the team, Bobby Toon, who's since passed away, and Chris took over the team. Now, Chris didn't want to be a manager; he wanted to be a player, and I was sort of coming to my end of my playing career. Like I said, our arm was getting sore, and I didn't want to be player anymore. So they said, "How about managing?" So I was, fair enough. Somebody's got to do it. So I took over the management of the team, and we had a good season. We finished top that season, but only managed one season.
Is that when you moved into umpiring?
Yeah. We had a gentleman named Tommy Roddick. He was from Winnick, and he used to do all our home games. But Tommy was, getting on in age too, and he just decided he wasn't going to umpire no more. So they said, "We need an umpire because we couldn't afford to get an umpire to travel long distance." So I said, "Oh God, guess where I'm going." So I ended up being an umpire. I said, "I'll umpire only home games." So, I was free to do other things during away games. That didn't work out. Next thing you know, I had Manchester call me and Halton calling me saying, "Can you come up and do a game?" So one thing led to another, and I started umpiring full time then.
I was sure if it was a difficult decision to make to go into umpiring, but I guess you was sort of forced into it.
It wasn't difficult. It was a different transition. Because a lot of times they say an umpire who's played the game has more knowledge of it. Maybe not the rules, but he has, if you get in a conflict with a manager, you've been on that side before, so you know how to handle the situation better than an umpire who's never played it. Right away, he starts quoting rules and that, then throws the man out of the game. And I've run across that quite a few times. Because I played the game, I knew how that manager felt, so I give him more leadway. And 9 times out of 10, he shook my hand and walked away. So I mean, it's a natural progression. I think, like I said, after you become a manager, the next step up is an umpire.
So what sort of adventures has umpiring taken you on? You got any funny stories you want to share with us?
Well, at first year, I umpired, I got picked to do the British Baseball Championships, which was that time down in Brighton. And I was okay because I done most games. In fact, every game I done on my own. But during the championship games, you do 2-man system, 3-man systems, and the final is actually a 4-man system. I've never done a 4-man system. I've never done a 3-man system. Heck, sometimes I didn't even do a 2-man system. So I had to get smart real quick. But like I said, I struggled through it. And in the final, they give me a 15-minute course on how to do a 4-man system. Said you're on second base, so you go out here, you do this, you do that. And my head was just bursting with all this information. I think we had 2 plays that were close, and I got them right, so I was happy with that. So when I went into Europe to umpire, I at least had a 4-man system knowledge down.
So whereabouts in Europe did umpiring take you?
Well, it took me to Sweden 3 times, Belgium twice, Czech Republic, Switzerland, France. Yep, that's it.
And who's got the better baseball? Britain, Sweden, Belgium, Czech Republic, Switzerland, or France? Bear in mind, you're on the British Baseball Podcast.
Yeah. Well, to be honest with you, the European teams surprised me. Not only the grounds were top level, but a lot of the nation's players, other than the foreign players they had work playing for them, like they were really good. I was surprised at how level they played at. Tel Aviv, we went to Israel to umpire, and the Israeli players were just super. I've never seen players like them before. And they had a pitcher that pitched the day before, and he had like 115 pitches. He won the game, and he pitched the day after, and he still was top level. I forget his name now, but he was a super player. And like I said, a lot of the foreign players now in Europe are becoming proficient because they've had a lot of Americans or Canadians or whatever there to help them along. But it's showing in Europe now. So I hope that the foreign players we got in Britain, a lot of that will rub off on the local players. But like I said, I was surprised in Europe of the degree and level of baseball that was played in these countries. Sweden's another one. Sweden has a great program, and a lot of their players are foreign-based players, but they're helping out. That's what counts.
So, with all your time spent in British baseball, which sort of decade or years do you think has been the best?
I'd have to say my umpiring years, because I learned what it was like to be on the other side, the dark side as they call it, and it opened my eyes to a lot of parts of baseball that I wasn't aware of. Because I've done my times arguing with referees as a player and as a manager, and when I become an umpire, I could see their point of view. But I think that was the best time because I learned something different about baseball rather than being a player or a manager.
So this brings us on to the reason why we're here today. What inspired you to write a book? Do you read lots of baseball books yourself, and you thought you wanted? Is it more like a memoirs, or is it more of a personal thing?
Basically, it was from my own. I just wanted to, put my thoughts down, and I sent it to the Trojans website because I wanted to, give them the insight about the history of the Trojans from the time I started playing baseball up until the time I left. So it was basically for my own satisfaction. I really didn't intend it to do anything else. And then when I heard your podcast, I said, well, maybe Matt would like to have some insight into this.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said at the start of the show, really enjoyed it. It's been very insightful. Really like listening to people's tales on baseball and stories about baseball. It's just something warming and lovely about it that I don't get from any other sport. So yeah, it's been great to listen to.
Yeah, like I said, I enjoy your podcast. Hearing different people, especially Ian, Blease talking about the Trojans, because I remember Ian when he played for Preston, and at that time I could tell he was going to be a good ball player. He had one of those natural abilities, and you could, like I said, you can pick these out over the years, different players who are going to go further in the game, and Ian was one of them. But he's
So,
another one that's followed that natural progression. He's realized his time at playing was coming to an end, so he's took on the next position. And I would like to see him become an umpire because he's got a good eye, for the game and for the playing and making calls as an umpire. And I'd like to see him be that. I'd like to see a lot of other ex-players take up the umpiring position.
hmm, there's a few of us that are doing Gabor Erdos's webinars. He hosts one every other Thursday, and I've been attending that just to get a better insight into like you said before, life on the dark side. And he's put such a great program together. It's really done a lot of hard work, and it's been very interesting. And it would be good to see players staying, and even managers, I suppose, staying in the game long after they feel like they've given what they can to sort of get, like you said, it's giving you a new sort of view and an angle on it also. Maybe
Yeah.
there's something there.
Well, when I started umpiring, we had the BBF used to control the umpires. They done the scheduling, training, and all that. Well, what training there was. And when I joined, they turned it over to the ABUAGB, which is the Amateur Baseball Umpires Association, which is big here in the States. It's for amateur umpires. And we associated with them and became ABAGB. And we had the likes of Ed Ensel, Jen Complete, Cliff Booth. We had some good umpires, and we run training clinics, hoping to get more players or ex-players involved in umpiring. Because let's be honest, it's not a game till you call it. You know what I mean? You need an umpire to call the game, and so we tried to get like team umpires. Now, I don't know if you're aware of it, but all games in the UK are played double headers. So what you do is you have one player umpire the first game. He can play the second game. One of the other guys can umpire the second game that he played the first game, or home and away. You have one umpire doing a home game, one umpire doing an away game. So they get to play as well as umpire. But it's not working out that way. They just don't want to go with umpiring for whatever reason.
Yeah. Are you still involved in the game now that you're back in the States?
Well, I was when I first got here. I joined the Massachusetts Amateur Umpire Association, and I've done 2 seasons, but I wasn't impressed with it, mainly because the clinics gave every year was based on the same format, 2-man system, and it was the same stuff each year. And the umpires I worked with, a lot of them were older, in their late 70s, 80s, and they were stuck in their ways. In England, when we got told a certain way to umpire, we took that as gospel. Prime example, first game I done, I was working with an older gentleman at first base. Fly ball in the outfield, trouble ball. Now, we were always taught first base umpire goes out, the plate umpire follows the runner around. This guy didn't do anything. And so after the game, I asked him about it. I said, well, you're supposed to go out on trouble balls. Oh, well, I'll leave it up to the home plate umpire to do that. Well, I'm further away from the plate than he is. How am I going to call it, So
Yeah.
a lot of the umpires follow that way over here. And I thought to myself, I wasn't taught that way. This is the way I was taught, which is, I think, the proper way. But amateur baseball umpires here, they don't play that way. So it became a problem for me. And I sort of, after a couple of seasons, I thought twice about whether I wanted to do it. Then I got prostate cancer, and that sort of took my energy away. And I didn't want to umpire. So when I got over the prostate cancer, I would say that's it. I finished with baseball. Umpiring, I'll still go to games. I'll watch the game from the stands, but I won't get involved in it anymore.
So how are you filling your time now?
Taking the wife shopping, doing housework. Basically going to the garden. I just do what old people do.
Behave yourself. You don't look a day over 27.
Well, it's 72. That's what everyone says. You look about 32 years old. I said, yeah, I feel like about 85 years old.
And my back and my knees feel like that at the moment. I think I'm the shortest rookie career you'll ever see. I always like to leave the last word open to the guest. Speak. Anything else you'd like to add?
No, other than just like to wish all my friends over in England, the ones I played with, the managers with, the umpired with, be safe. Stay in the house like I tell you to, or I'll come over there and kick your butts.
Bernard, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
You too,
Keep
Matt.
up your good work. And I can't wait to read some more of your stuff. Take it easy, my friend. And there we have it. Thanks again to BJ for his contribution and his time. I hope you really enjoyed it as much as I did. He is a listener as well and has been supportive from the very beginning, and it's been great to finally have him on the show to tell his tales too. And if you want to hear more, head on over to the Liverpool Trojans website. You can find them on Twitter and you can see some of the stuff that is being published there too. If you'd like to submit a story or see about coming to the show yourself to tell some tales from British baseball, or even to talk about your club and its history, you can get in touch by emailing the show britishbaseballpodcast@gmail.com. But for this week, that's all from me. And until next time, stay safe, keep your spirits high, we'll get through this together. Much love. Ta-ra.